Here we go. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your patience. I know we're 2 minutes late, but I'm very happy to be joined again by, well, the first time with Amanda directly, but again by Sputnik ATX, an accelerator out of Austin, Texas, for a little bit of a different programming than normally do. We generally talk about boring things like 83B elections and like how to split stock and things like that. But there's a whole other side of running a startup. It's an emotional side, it's a personal challenge side, it's a growth side, it's a perspective, it's a vision side. And they don't have Delaware corporate law to tell you how to do that stuff. However, there are a bunch of people out there in the space, organizations, individuals, angel investors, accelerators that specialize in helping startups learn this part of, being a founder. And there's not a book for it necessarily. There are books about it that explain it to you, but it's not as rote as something like filing a Delaware incorporation or making sure you do an exemption filing when you raise funds. It's a bit squishier. So we brought in Amanda, who's a senior associate at Sputnik ATX, to kind of just have an informal conversation around what they call the growth mindset and what other people have talked about it, not just as you an individual, but also infusing it into the company as you grow it, because startups are challenging by their very nature. Their business models are uncertain. They're usually doing something that, it's not like opening a restaurant where you can go and just have a playbook and run it. It's something new. Often the business model itself hasn't been tested or the market is nascent and things like that. So a different kind of culture and a different kind of mentality can be really helpful in, building that traction and making sure you don't get too blocked. So without further ado, we're going to keep this pretty informal and casual. I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to introduce herself and a bit about what Sputnik does. If you haven't received an email from me about Sputnik, you will probably within the next week or so. They have a program that is closing within next week, a really cool accelerator, one of the more OG. We've been partners with them for a long time, but it's your classic money for support and access and networking and growth down out of Austin. So if you haven't got one yet, you probably will check it out. They run a very cool program, but I will let somebody who is a specialist at it tell us more about it. Take it away, Amanda.
Thanks, Ryan. So my name is Amanda Eakin. I've been at Sputnik for 6 years now. We launched in we had our first cohort in 2018, and we've been investing in early stage startups since. So we invest super early when founders have like MVP and a customer, and they're looking to learn how to sell and grow from there and find product market fit. And our program is focused on how to sell mostly. We have a little bit at the end of the 13 weeks about how to raise money from investors, but our thought is that if you are growing, the rest will come easier. So that's our focus. The only way we make money is as an investor. We don't charge fees for the accelerator or anything. So the accelerator to us is our way of making our portfolio succeed with a higher chance of success.
And you've had some pretty good successes, I think, already, right? In that, 6 years or so?
Yeah, we definitely have some that are tracking really well. Nitex is one of them. They're doing supply chain manufacturing logistics for the fashion industry. They're actually out of Bangladesh. We started the program with the idea that we're only investing in Texas, but since COVID, kind of some of our best companies were coming from other parts of the world. So now we still run the program as an in-person program, but we want to open the possibilities to everyone around the world for where their business could be.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And the last thing is, I believe, well, that's actually a good segue into, so helping startups sell, which I actually love that positioning, because if you get good at selling, the need of raising funds is actually either easier or maybe not even necessary. And it's usually the number one thing that early stage startups lack, is less about who's going to give me money and let's run and knock down every door I can possibly do to try to get funds, and more about how about your customers. That's the best way to get money. It doesn't involve equity. But let's dive into the topic at hand. So you propose this to us as developing a growth mindset. People might have heard it before, but do you want to specifically kind of wrap, what is it to you and what do you mean when you say it?
I think part of it is diving into being an entrepreneur and having a startup. There's so much that is unknown. So you really have to have a growth mindset to and know that like you're not going to have the answer to everything. It's not the most safe and secure job that you could have for yourself, or even the easiest way to make a lot of money. So you really have to be passionate about it and willing to learn and grow constantly. I think the other part of it is knowing the difference in the kind of growth mindset that you need to have a startup and the kind of growth mindset that you need to have something that would be like a great family business. There's a difference. Neither one is right or wrong. But if you're raising venture capital money, you need to know the difference and understand that what different kinds of investors are looking for in those cases.
I see what you're saying. So there is well, one, I want to back up to the idea of being an entrepreneur is probably not the easiest way to make money. And I do think that is something that, needs to be said more, because a lot of people, you hear it a lot, which is like, oh, the only way to make, money out of stock is if you're the founder, if you own a significant amount, like, stock options are not your key to glorious wealth or anything like that if joining a later stage company. So people get in their minds that only the founders make money. But if making money is your only purpose for starting a startup, there are many easier ways to make much more money at much less risky options.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so what is that other thing that you need to bring to, if it's not making money, why would you start a startup?
Well, that's a good question. And people, you have to be a little bit crazy and a little bit, and a little bit of, there's a little bit of crazy and a little bit of knowing what maybe other people don't about a problem that you are fixing. Um, and yeah, it's everything that eventually becomes a big successful startup was once kind of a crazy idea. I think like the idea of renting out your mattress to people, like your side room to people at Airbnb probably sounded really weird at first. Like I remember before Airbnb, I was traveling and used couchsurfing.com
Oh yeah.
for and that was free. And Airbnb is an interesting idea that people might pay for something like that. But here we are. So, and like same with Uber, right? Like, are people going to get in a stranger's car? That where do you start with that?
Yep.
Everything starts with a kind of a crazy, weird idea where all the logistics aren't worked out and you tackle it day by day.
And I think a lot of times people, because it's almost such a household name now, not a lot of people realize that the air in Airbnb was because it was originally air mattresses, like inflatable mattresses. They started the company around people came out to the valley for conferences and whatnot, and like they all wanted to join in these things. Like, oh, we'll just like blow up a mattress and charge somebody for it, and they did it. One of my favorite things. I mean, Paul Graham, I think during the pitch said, "People are literally going to get murdered. You guys are crazy. Like nobody's going to buy this." But eventually invested, and I think I can't remember if it was Paul Graham or somebody else said the key part of the motivation of the founders is they had already experienced the experience that they wanted to make into a business. They had done it. They had actually rented out their space on air mattresses for friends and found all the positive, externalities that anybody who's traveled like that is like, oh, you're closer to actually the people that live there. You're closer to what, daily life is like in that location rather than, hotel tourism and things like that. You build relationships, you share stories, et cetera, et cetera. But they felt it and they're like, if we can get it, other people can get it, but they probably sound really crazy trying to sell people on it.
Definitely.
Going back to your second point, you said two kinds of growth mindsets for a restaurant entrepreneur and a VC high growth startup entrepreneur. What's the difference there?
Yeah. So the like restaurant could be a restaurant, it could be um another kind of like local brick and mortar shop.
Coffee shop, yoga studio,
Yeah, these things like
landscaping.
are referred to um, by VCs sometimes as a lifestyle business or a family business. And those aren't judgment calls. It's just a totally different flavor of business, and the way that you go about growing it and running it is going to be different. The way that you go about getting it funded is going to be different. So sometimes I'll get pitches for lifestyle and family businesses from people wanting money from us as a VC, and it's not a fit. And I explain why. VCs in VC, the portfolio, what usually happens is most startups have small exits or fail, and a small portion of startups will make it big and make up for the others that fail and then some. This is something called the power law. There's a really good book out about it, actually, if anyone wants to like understand where VCs are coming from in the history of VC. That book is an excellent resource. But with that kind of fact of the universe that VC runs on the power law, you have to make every investment believing that each one could be that one that will make up for the rest. And a family business, one that grows to tens of millions or $50 million in revenue and ever more, is an incredible outcome for the person and their family that's running it, but not for the investor. That will never pay off for the rest of the portfolio. So it's really a matter of what game you want to play, and either one could be an incredible outcome for you personally. It's just a matter of, do you want to build a family business like that, or do you want to build a billion-dollar business? Family businesses tend to grow a little bit slower, and maybe even sometimes be passed down through generations. Startups tend to grow faster, and what VCs expect from them is that they'll get exits within 10 years or less, because the people that give VCs money, like VCs are just money managers for other people most of the time, and those people want their money back within 10 years.
Eventually.
Fund. Yeah, so it can't be it's not a extremely long term. It's relatively long term to other investments, but it's not like a generational.
Right. And it's very liquid. So, generally you're not trading these things, you're selling. Yeah. And I think our whole, a certain side of the industry that I think you and I hang out on want to claim back the lifestyle business, because I think it's been used like pejoratively and like, oh, this is a lifestyle business, this is worthless. It's like, not at all. Lifestyle is a great word. It's actually what I try to have a really good one of. And, a lot of people like to do that. It's just the difference when, if I'm going to give you, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and almost all of you are going to fail, and the only way my portfolio makes money is an outsized return, and we're talking 30x, 60x of not just my initial investment, but the follow-ons as your company grows, those kind of returns are so rare, but they have to be, because most of these companies just won't be around. And I think there's stats all over the place. People say 80% in 5 years or something like that. But it basically, a very small, perhaps, single digit number of your companies are actually going to make all the returns of the portfolio for both angels and VCs. Yeah.
And there are funding options for family businesses too. It's just not VC. You can get angels. I know restaurant groups in town that have angel investors, small business loans, other things.
Yep.
It's just knowing which one is which. That's all.
All right, so let's focus, because we are in the realm of startups and high growth. Let's assume when we say growth mindset, we need the Silicon Valley, not Valley, the alley. Are you the Silicon Desert down in Austin?
Silicon Hills.
Silicon Hills, there we go. Sorry, yeah. Hill country, that's right. So assuming those kind of companies, it doesn't necessarily have to be all unicorns, but 100 mega million dollar corns, shorter timeframes, larger exits, bigger markets, bigger scale. What is, we talked about two kinds of growth mindsets of entrepreneurialness. And I will say, even starting a restaurant, you need to be a crazy person in a certain way. Yeah. Starting your own thing generally requires a little bit of that edge, insanity. But what is the alternative to a growth mindset? what is a fixed mindset? What would we be, how are we comparing and contrasting those two?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it can probably come in a lot of flavors, but I think it's like a lack of curiosity is what comes to mind when I think of a fixed mindset, um, or boxing yourself in to think like to thinking smaller. So what I mean by that is so within the startup realm of things, sometimes founders will, and I understand why this is hard, they'll get in a routine of working in the business and not taking time to zoom out and work on the business, meaning they're so steeped in the details of day-to-day operations that it's hard to step back and think, what is the big vision here? Like, where am I going to grow to be? What does my company look like in 10 years, 7 to 10 years, in terms of like culture, product lines? And when people are pitching VCs, they like to hear like this ultimate vision. They're trying to imagine um, what that's going to look like. Is this something that could sell later on or IPO? Um, so I'll give an example. One of our companies is called Filimanila. They're a Filipino sauce company. Um, and the way that I just pitched them, Filipino sauce company, sounds small. They're actually starting with three iconic Filipino sauces, adobo, kare kare, and one more that is not coming to mind. And then they've just added some spreads, ube and coconut spreads. And Jake, the founder, could pitch his company as a Filipino sauce company, or he could pitch it with like a kind of growth mindset as the Goya of Filipino foods, where he's starting with sauces, but he's going to add other product lines and be like the face of an entire food culture.
Culture. I drive by a massive, well, I used to when I lived in Milburn, New Jersey, on the way to New York, the train would go right by the massive Goya factory on the outskirts of Newark. And it is, IKEA is a furniture, seller, but it's, they don't sell a dozen pieces of furniture to people every, month. They sell, I don't know, thousands. So I think that is the difference. And even putting it in, restaurants are actually a really good example. I think Nobu is an interesting example. And I know there's a cocktail company, or it started as a cocktail restaurant in New York City called Death and Company, which had a really strong influence on cocktail culture just through their kind of programming and socials and whatnot. And they switched from like, well, what makes a cocktail, bar, profitable? It's like, well, people coming to it all the time, right? Fill up the seats, sell drinks every night. But it's like, well, how many seats do you have? I guess in New York, maybe you could build an entire second, cocktail bar, but it's all linear, right? You still have to hire staff. You still have to, get ingredients, glassware, ice, electricity, and things like that. So their whole approach, and they did a funding round, like a high profile funding round, was like, we do not want to be just a successful cocktail bar. We want to be known across the world as basically like higher level cocktail culture in every major city. Any hotel we're going to partner with, we're going to open up, we're going to consult, we're going to be like the engine underneath that. And that's a shift in the mindset in terms of, making a successful restaurant is making sure it's very busy as long as you possibly can. Make sure the food's good, you hire well and do things. But then there's that next level ambition, which, if anybody told somebody a decade ago, Death and Company is going to raise a VC round, even myself would have been like, well, yeah, they're a great bar, but like, how are they ever going to make VC like returns? Like, they cap it so quick.
I love that. Yeah, I've seen some cases where people have had a family business for some time and then they're like, you know what? I want to take over the world. And you can sometimes make that shift depending on what the business is. It's really interesting.
Awesome. All right. So I think establishing kind of the I mean, the examples are probably the better way to communicate this. But if you're a founder, and probably a lot of the founders on this call already are already saying, I have a growth mindset. That's why I'm here. That's why I have a startup. I think I'm going to revolutionize, people's relationships with pets, pets' relationships with each other. I envision a world in which, the Filipino food is all associated with one brand or something like that. And I think envisioning the world is a good way of putting that kind of difference. Is that often I find the most successful founders are the ones who are almost like immediately frustrated with why something hasn't changed. They're thinking of a different future and the way things operate differently, perhaps through great anxiety personally. But they think they have that growth mindset. Is that enough? Just the founder having the growth mindset?
Enough to grow and get to that.
Yeah, to be successful in what they want to grow.
I think this comes in different stages. So I think when you're a really early stage seed, pre-seed company, and it's just the two founders, you can kind of run on that idea. And as long as you're like always keeping it in mind, taking some time to step back every now and think about it, and using that as like your North Star and working toward that goal, and that's good. Once you start to raise money from VCs, hire a team, like grow into a Series A company and beyond, you have to start communicating that idea a lot. And people really forget to do that. And so just because it's in your head as your vision, I don't think that's enough. It becomes more and more necessary for you to put that on paper, repeat it all the time to your team as it grows, and as you become less involved in the day-to-day operations, so that it becomes like infused into your culture.
Yeah, so extending it.
Everybody is like rowing toward the same thing. Actually, so now that more of our companies are growing up and growing into like Series A and B companies, we're putting together some curriculum that's more focused on that. And we're talking about this a lot. And there's a book called Traction
Oh yeah, I'll get a link for that.
Yeah, there's two books called Traction. One of them is in our curriculum for pre-seed startups. That's a blue book. This one is a black book by Gino Wickman. Looks like this.
Yeah.
And it's really good. It talks about getting everyone rowing in the same direction at that point. I think it's most useful for like after you've raised your seed round through Series A.
I'm going to find both book links and throw them in the chat for people. Oh, and by the way, people in the chat and people, feel free to use the QA if you want either of us to dig into something or explain something. We're making this one pretty informal, so we'll be happy to answer questions or clarify anything. And I will get that link after I ask you my next question. All right, so you're talking about infusing that. What you said, I mean, something I've experienced personally is like a lot of times the founder still with the company seems like the crazy person, right? They're talking to like, all, they've hired dozens of people and they're trying to go after a thing. And you have a meeting with like a well-run product team, and the CEO comes in, to like moonlight and is like saying things where everybody's like, what is this person talking about? Like, we need to like deliver stuff the next like week, the next month, but they're talking about this other stuff. And it kind of like, sometimes you can sort of lose orbit from what the organization is actually doing and what the founder wants to do. So what kind of things can you do to, it's not even a growth mindset of an individual, but of an organization, to keep the organization in that kind of growth mindset, knowing that you still have to write software and deliver it by the end of the week or by the end of the month, or do things like that. Like, we're one in inches, not, miles, but how does one kind of get that growth mindset infused into the culture of a company?
I think one thing is starting with them in OKRs. Like your team should have measurable goals set as OKRs that kind of tie to the goals of the whole company, and everything should kind of descend from that big vision. And you can have like 3-year goals, 10-year goals, goals for the end of the year. And they should all kind of like build toward that big vision. And you can communicate those to your team every time you meet, like doing a performance review or something like that. And I'm getting into kind of like later stage. I don't know how late people in this call are, but maybe like if you're a really early stage company and you have it's just the two founders and a couple of team members right now. Um, I think like not forgetting to just take some time to go to dinner with your team and like dream, dream about the big vision together and stay excited about it. And remember, like getting out of the tasks that you have to do today and remembering where you're going.
I think that both from a like an interest standpoint, I put in the chat, if people aren't familiar, OKRs are objectives and key results. It's a very common means of kind of infusing strategy and goal setting throughout your company from the tippy top down to however many people you are. And something I've witnessed in organizations of many sizes is that, you can go, there's an entire book on OKRs, there, 300 pages or 200 pages about like how to run the process and how these all things are important. But to me, it's always the principle and the spirit of them is, making sure that there is a directional arrow of growth, knowing that, at some point as you grow, people need to write software, people need to answer support tickets, people need to refund customers and things like that. But to constantly associate those behaviors back to a goal. And so when I see smaller companies, like you said, if they're like, we're going to run an OKR process and we're going to have the long meetings and we're going to produce the documentation and we're going to like build the dashboards of the KRs and things like that, and it's 3 people, I'm like, you're leaning way too hard on the process part and you're missing the principal part. The principal part is we have a North Star, and that North Star trickles down to like a 5-year plan, which trickles down to kind of a 3-year plan or a 3-year goal, which can literally come down to quarterly or even monthly ideas of like, well, what is going to move us? But being sure that you're not moving aimlessly, you're actually moving towards a direction. And once more people get involved, you can start to layer more process on that, because there's only so many hours in a day. You can't all, 3 people can align pretty well. 4 people, probably 50% as well. 5 people were already down to maybe like 10%.
Yeah.
But introducing them in layers as the company grows, and you just need that, like the beating drum of the heart of the company.
Yeah, totally. Like in the program, we have people write out their OKRs even as really young companies. And you can start with like overall business OKRs, maybe individuals, but then as your company grows, you'll have teams of people and you'll have OKRs for those teams. And yeah, like I admire the desire to like put processes in place, because that does become really important at a certain stage. But yeah, there's a balance in the beginning where you have to you're growing fast, so your processes only get you so far.
Yeah. I
And you're
find it
still
like,
figuring out what those are going to be.
yeah, I think of it in almost every stage of a company is what I would call like just in time complexity, where this is our MO with Gust and Gust Launch, which is like, you do not need to engineer your 10x voting rights or your milestone based vesting schedules or your like super heavyweight relationship management when it's you and a co-founder or something like that. You should just take the 80/20 rule standard all the way and stop worrying about it, and then get to focus on working on your business. Because early customers, if they never come, it doesn't matter how nice your documents are, how intricate your management structure is and your share classes and things like that. None of it matters. But
Yeah.
at an inflection point, post friends and family round, maybe after going through an accelerator, maybe after getting your first significant investment, kind of like taking the step back and being like, all right, what complexity do we need to introduce? Because we're kind of now at a new stage. And I think you can do the exact same thing with process and how you run your company. Yeah, we actually have a pretty good question that sort of touches on this from Oglab. I hope I pronounced that right. When we're talking about, going from 2 or 3 people to maybe 6 or 10, how can you get the right people on board from the start? As CEO, how can we prevent from getting manipulated by employees?
Oh, interesting. I think it helps to have a co-founder. Um, in many different aspects, but one of them is to like bounce ideas off of each other and like, do you like this hire? Do I like this hire? Then you always have someone to kind of check you and you check them. Um, and let me see, let me read that question again.
Yeah, I'll fill in. I'm just going to
Find the
double
right.
down on the co-founder part because having somebody, one, check you on your own bullshit, and two, just to be able to have a dialogue outside of your head is extremely strong. And I think when things are really early, you can spin your brain like crazy. Like, is this the right hire? Are they actually telling me the truth? Is this and that? And like, being able to just verbalize that without one having to have the conversation with the person themselves and maybe expose yourself to further manipulation or God knows what, or exhausting your partner or random friends and things like that who stop inviting you to parties. Having somebody who's mutually aligned for that is really big, and it's a good way to challenge each other. And honestly, I think it's helpful to have another person get you more in a growth mindset because you can ask questions. You can play devil's advocate for each other. Something our CEO and Pete and I do all the time is like, somebody makes a claim and the other person's like, well, is that actually true? Like, what do you actually mean by that? Is that really impossible, or is that, assumed? And it's a really helpful way to kind of butt up against the limits of reality.
Yeah. And I think like you will make mistakes in hiring and um the kind of accepted truth of startup hiring is hire fast, fire fast. Like you're moving quickly. There are you can be kind, but you also have to look out for your business and the growth of your business. And I've even had some founders say that like they try to help the person find another job. It's not your obligation, but it's a really nice thing to do. But if they're not working out, you have to make that decision quickly. If you feel like you're being manipulated, that's probably not a good sign. So, if it's not a right fit, startups are hard. They're not for everyone.
And I think
I think higher understanding that you might make a mistake and that, that's okay.
Yeah, and I think this is actually leaning on our expertise. This is a place where clear contracts and expectations make a significant difference because the human nature is so easy to be fuzzy with. Like, oh, we're friends. What does friendship mean to you? What does friendship mean to me? Oh, we're co-founders. We're employees. I'm employee number one. All those things, people can feel different things about them. But if you hire somebody as a contractor to start with, which is like, I don't control you, I don't provide you equipment, I don't tell you have to work 10 to 5 or, that you take lunch breaks at this time. You're like, you're a contractor, I hire you for a task. And that, you have a contract with that person and maybe they get equity too. They get an equity grant along with it, but that equity grant has vesting on it. And it's, an entire year until that vesting actually even starts. So now you have a 12-month window and a clear contracting relationship where if they're a good fit for the company, you will see the value, especially in the early stages. The difference between something happening and nothing happening is very, very stark because like you're a company with no customers. So like getting one customer or getting a piece of code written or getting a design out there is extremely tangible. This isn't like, is employee number 732, 10 degrees down from my management hierarchy, doing as good as employee number 1023 or something like that. So putting those contracts in place though, as a founder, as a CEO, as the director of your company, is going to give you the ability to make those decisions without having to like convince somebody they're not a good fit for your company because you had like a handshake agreement between two friends who thought it. Like that can get into all kinds of fighting, who owns what, yada yada. If they're a contractor to start with and you're like, I'm terminating this contract based on this clause that we both agreed to, clean as can be. Obviously there's psychic damage, there's things that you'll have to deal with, to have those conversations, but it really avoids you from getting in a position where you actually don't have any legal means to act. And Elias, I think most of this, Elias also asked, what about advisors? I think this also flows over to advisors. Advisors are a little bit easier in my mind, though, because the most standard advisor agreement is a 3-month vesting schedule with like a 2-year cliff. 3 months is very short, which means that if you bring somebody on as an official advisor with a contract and you're not experiencing a level up in terms of your network, your expertise, your awareness of the market, whatever you brought them on to do, like kill that relationship and say, maybe we need to reform it. Maybe you're more of a contractor. Maybe this just doesn't work at all. And that, like Amanda said, hire fast and fire fast to learn if somebody's really in it and providing the value that they can.
Yeah, as far as advisors go, the best kind of advisors, in our opinion, is people that have founded a company before that just want to help and they're not asking for money. Because they've gone through it, they have made their money. They know what you're doing, going through, and they're not going to try to like charge you a lot because they remember being in that situation.
We say if an advisor asks for money, they're not an advisor, they're a contractor. Completely shifts the nature of the relationship. Advisors are equity only. They are usually people who are 2 to 3x more experienced than you in your domain. Maybe it's, some of the ones I've seen is like a former executive of a company that is like adjacent to your industry who scaled through phases X and Z, which are the phases that you're in front of right now. Like those are perfect kind of advisor relationships. And equity is the most fair.
Sometimes they'll even invest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the best. An advisor with an equity from the advisor thing with a safe convertible note or preferred shares is like all in.
Yeah.
Excellent. We got some other questions here. Do you want to, let's see. Let me read through the questions and maybe I'll give you something to chew on in between that and I'll post some up. So we talked about taking a growth-oriented mindset of the founder, infusing into the culture through, process at the right resolution of the state of the company. What do you find that there are particular inflection points where the founder's role changes?
Yeah, definitely. The founder's role seems to change at probably like at the point where they get their first check. You then have people to answer to, and you're now in like a long-term relationship with an investor. So that doesn't change the business a whole lot necessarily, but it's just I feel like that's an inflection point when you get your first investment. The second investment point or inflection point would probably be after you've raised your seed round, things start to change. That's when like this book comes into play, when you start to become an A round company. You've got people working, like a lot more people working for you now. You have to put processes in place. We've as I mentioned, we've got some founders in this stage right now, and I think a good test for whether you've got your processes in place is, can you take a week vacation and would everything still run smoothly? And it's not to say that you would necessarily do that and be completely unplugged, but test it out and see if it works. Because if it doesn't, if everything completely breaks when you leave, then it's still like, if it was my company, it's still like the Amanda show. Like the Amanda show, you have to be building a company where different people play different roles. It's not just the founder doing everything. The companies where the founder is trying to do everything don't get sold, because if you try to sell that, how is the acquirer going to run it?
Yeah, unless they're exactly a carbon copy of you, and in which case they could have done it themselves.
Yeah.
No, that's a very, I think of it often as kind of like growing and shedding skins. I think founders, if you're a solo founder, you wear every single hat at the beginning of the business. You're the CFO, you're the CEO, you're the core director, you're the chief of product, you're co-engineer if it's an engineering organization. And as somebody who has recently hired people in to replace roles that I have made up in my own organization, it's like you kind of grow the skin to figure it out because you care about it for the existential survival of your business. And then you can usually find somebody who's actually way better at operationalizing what you have kind of figured out through the kind of like dynamic edge of reality, right? Selling something new or something like that, but being like, okay, I might have, de-risk this and carve out the uncertainty and figured something out, but there's usually a discipline that knows exactly how to do that kind of thing then in the best possible way. Whether it's sales or technology or development, people say it's like, how many lines of code are left, that, the Collison brothers or Mark Zuckerberg wrote in Facebook. It's like probably very few, if not none, because like once you'd figured out the thing that was different, like you start to bring people in to really back you up and to do honestly sometimes a better job at what you figured out through sheer strength of will and interest and passion. But that's really what you need to be shedding frequently, especially if you're growing very, very fast.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of it's hard because for a lot of founders, the company becomes their child. Because you've like spent blood, sweat, and tears on it for years. So it's easy to see why that is. But sometimes, actually, oftentimes, the founder is not the right person to be the CEO at some point. And it's a lot of the time they don't even enjoy it because it really does become a different job. Like you have to be in charge of the company culture, like constantly repeat your values over and over again. All the fun stuff that doesn't have to do with product. Founders often love doing product, and being CEO of a like be round company doesn't look like that very much. So I think it's useful as you grow to understand what the CEO looks like, what the CEO's role is at that point. And I would, it's probably hard to do this, but I think a good exercise to do would be to like try to find other people for the role and then have yourself interviewed by the board and see who wins.
that
And it's the best thing for the company to have the right person in that role for it, because someone needs to be a good CEO, whether that's you or not. And you can always make yourself head of innovation or something and still have your founder equity and keep doing the part of the company that you love and that you're really good at.
Yeah, and we've seen this in bigger, household success stories all the time in terms of bringing in CEOs, but the founding team moves on to chairman positions, board positions. Even a lot of technology-driven companies. If you're the sole source at the start, or you're like the more heavier weight co-founder, you might be the CEO in the beginning. But if your love is literally writing technology and inventing like the future, it's like moving into a CTO role. Or what, honestly, one thing I like to open people's eyes a lot is like, see anything other than CEO means nothing to Delaware. CFO, CMO, chief people officer, whatever you want. Those are for internal organization of how the company runs. Those are, to structure your company, and, companies are constantly trying to innovate on what those roles and responsibilities are. But at the end of the day, when it comes to upside in the company, influence in the company from a legal level, directors and officers and shareholders are it. So if you're a very significant shareholder in a company, you have power and presence in that company. So removing your ego from like, well, I must be the CEO because the CEO is the most important person in the company, et cetera, gets more complicated as the company grows and it needs different things. And like you said, Amanda, sometimes people get miserable in the job that they started with because like it's not their skill set. It's not what brings them joy. It's not what, inspires them or something like that. And finding, again, back to even the early principles, like somebody you really trust, somebody you really want to work with, somebody who's really good for the company can make everybody feel better. I mean, I've been through so many different corporate structures and different, the influence that you feel when a new person comes into a leadership position can sometimes literally make you fall in love with your job all over again, or make you want to run screaming for the hills in a way that you've never imagined.
Yeah, totally. Like if you are a main shareholder of the company, then the CEO kind of, and you're on the board, like the CEO works for you still.
Yeah.
So don't get too caught up in the titles. um, there could be a person out there that would love to do that job, and everyone would be happier and richer for it. So
Great. Well,
yeah.
we have an interesting question. This is much more on your expertise on actually helping startups out. Agbor asks, what do you consider more important? So we're going back to an early stage startup. Number of transactions, users, revenue, number of partnerships, I'm assuming, et cetera.
Let's see.
That's in the Q&A, not in the chat.
I see it. Yeah. I think it, I think like, why do you have to choose?
Can it be both?
I think it's hard to answer this question generally. But I will say, um, you can grow transaction users, partnerships and stuff before revenue. You can be like a pre-revenue company and start by some people use the strategy of like building up the user base and then turning the revenue button on later. The challenge that some people run into with that is if you build a user base, just make sure that there are people that would pay. I've seen people build user bases where it was like free to begin with, and then they made it paid. And it turns out they built a huge audience of people that just wanted a free product.
Yeah, people like
Um,
new things.
yep. So the other thing is if you're doing like a wait list kind of thing, don't let it get cold. Like communicate with them until you've launched the product. But I don't know. What do you think, Ryan? I don't see why you necessarily need to choose between those. I think you want to grow your customers overall.
Yeah, I think it really, you kind of have to look at it through a different lens and like pick your business model first. And it's interesting. There's really not so many business models out there that are differentiated. You can look, people invent new ones occasionally, but it takes like sea changes of technology. So I think, Amanda, your example was great with growing a user base before monetizing it. I think there was a very short period of time that business model, like Google is a great example, right? How could Google ever make money? We used it for, gosh, it felt like a decade before I even knew Google was making money off of me in some way, or Facebook or something like that. That particular kind of business model usually needs excessive amounts of capital up front because it doesn't work. Like the advertising model doesn't work until you're at such a scale that it actually can justify it, which means that you either need to be damn good at fundraising, scrappy as can be, or you're growing so hyper fast that you're adding millions of users or hundreds of thousands of users in short periods of time. If that's your business model, number of users is a very significant metric. And if you communicate it to investors that like, hey, we're going to capture the whole world of blank, and then we'll turn on the ad revenues, like they will understand that and they will attach value to user growth, even though they're free users or something like that. However, if you're a marketplace where you make money based on buyers and sellers, like transactions is probably much more important. How many people do you have selling like hand knit Etsy things or whatnot is like far more important than like if everybody signs up but nobody buys anything, so you make no money, nobody cares about users, they care about the actual transactions happening. And like metered based things like Amazon AWS or Stripe or something like that all kind of follow suit. So really start with your business model. What is the core driver of revenue for your business model? And that's the thing that's the most important to show traction on pretty much at any given stage of your business. Let's see. A couple of these are landing more more in my domain because I'm talking too much. But any other comments on that one, Amanda?
Yeah, I think let me think. I think yeah, the core driver of revenue makes sense. Like so in the program, we ask people to come up with their top 3 KPIs that they want to measure during the cohort, and the goal for everyone is to grow 10% week over week. That is a goal that we feel will set people up for success when they're having investor conversations, if they can meet that or do better. Revenue should be one of those, but sometimes people are pre-revenue. So we focus on those top three. I think one, maybe another good KPI is just making sure you're not building a leaky bucket with retention. So you might want users, but you also, like, if all of those users churn after a short period of time, then that's no use. So keep that in mind. Also, like, what does your customer journey look like through the entire funnel between where they become aware of you and where they become an advocate of you? And think of your KPIs throughout the whole funnel. All of those are important.
Yeah, I think chasing Me Too business models without understanding the fundamentals is a dangerous thing that happens a lot in startup land. Like, one success becomes known after many years of, existing in almost complete obscurity. And then people are like, oh, giving stuff away for free is the secret to getting tons of VC funding, and we'll be just as good as Google in the future. But if the unit economics of your marketplace are not every human being on earth, then like you might find yourself really short. If you're like, oh, I'm going to make a database of, I don't know, like pet hip replacement enthusiasts and give it away for free because they love learning and sharing about replacement hips for pets or something like that. And it turns out that's a couple, 50,000 people. Like, you're not going to get Google ad revenue out of that. You're not going to get anything like that. So really, really pull your model down to like reality before, giving stuff away for free or building a business model that will never make money. Because you can chase those things for years sometimes if you're scrappy and you get a little bit of stuff in here and there, and then realize there's really no, like you said, it's a leaky bucket. There's really no floor under there. We have a good question that I would be curious about your perspective on, because you guys are existing in the space of early stage. You're going to give money to a handful of startups in the very near term, but we are in strange economic times. Have you seen things changing in terms of funding, freeing up, continuing to freeze? What is kind of Sputnik ATX's perspective on the macroeconomic climate?
So I was also just in San Francisco Tech Week getting some opinions on this from investors there. I think it's a harder climate than maybe it was when we started Sputnik, where it seemed like money was flowing easily, 2017. But I like, from our perspective as an investor, we're playing a long game. So we make investments hoping to see returns like 7 to 10 years out. So these things we kind of like ride these waves. As far as startups go, I'm still seeing people raise money as long as you are selling and growing your revenue. It may be harder for it may not be one of those environments where they're just like throwing money at you, but it's kind of hard to answer that question because Texas is always its own little world, and founders here often raise in the Valley too, even though the investor network is growing a lot here. A lot of investors have even moved from San Francisco to Texas. People end up raising in the Valley. So yeah, I think I'm still seeing checks being written as long as you're growing something and you have paying customers.
And I think what you brought up earlier on in the thing about specifically VCs, when there are other people money allocators, and a lot of that other people's money is things like endowments, things like big funds and whatnot. And those definitely get hit by macroeconomic trends because investors are like, whoa, maybe we're not part of the Vision Fund 3 or whatnot. Like, things don't look so great on this thing. You know what? I'm going to buy some bonds because my portfolio only needs to grow by X amount. What's fun in our space, I think, well, it sounds like at Sputnik, you're getting both the pre-seed and now, or the seed-ish, and now a bit of growth companies. So that's kind of exciting. But on Gus, Gus, most of our people are, up to Series A or so. That's kind of the groups that we manage. And we have just seen very steady activity in the angel group world. We just went to the ACA conference, which is the Angel Capital Association in Vegas a couple weeks ago. And it was the most attended conference that the ACA, even pre-pandemic. And they are, these are first check writers. These are people who, will get to know the founders, smart money kind of investors who will not only just give them money, but also be there to make the connections and things like that. And that it's a very resilient industry because, like Amanda said, playing for the long game. So it's like investing in, downturns is some of the best returns, if you get those companies that are early and, things like that.
Yeah, I think coming from the perspective of an investor, I feel like it's so useful to know how VC works and where VCs get their money, because that affects how they make their decisions and like how much they have to invest and why they might be saying yes or no. Like if you mentioned LPs and their willingness to put their money into VC, remember that VCs are money managers for other people. So if those people have already committed to their fund, the VC has already raised their fund and announced it recently, then they have money to invest. That decision has already been made and the fund is already committed. So that's a good sign. Like questions to ask VCs might be, when did you raise your last fund? How many investments are you hoping to make this year? That those are good things to ask, was because sometimes investors will talk to you whether they have the money right now to invest or not, because they just want to start making the relationship. But it'll set the expectation. Like if you ask that question, then oh, they don't actually have any money to invest this year, so I'm not going to spend all my time trying to due diligence with them. Or they're trying to make 10 investments this year. I could be one of them.
Yeah, it's
clarify those things.
Yeah, the power dynamics in the space is don't always assume that the VC you're talking to, like they have the power if they hold the money, surely, but in terms of how you can represent yourself and, never be beholden to this idea of like, I have to please this person no matter what. Setting clear expectations can save you time. And honestly, it should show, if they're a good VC, it should look positively on you as a CEO and a founder, and that you're, if you waste time just talking to people about your business who have no intent or means to invest in it, it's not a great move. We have one last question. I think we'll wrap up, and I can answer this one super quick because Rahaf asked about, if you're in a situation, this is a little bit to like getting a bad co-founder or something like that, and something is stolen or you're not in a happy place. Like, do you go through a lawyer? What do you do? Police and whatnot. I would just say legal is the last resort, because lawsuits are expensive, and if you need to enact your rights through legal means, you're going to look at both sides and what their exhaustion threshold is for enforcing them, going through contracts, going to court. This is America. You can sue anybody for any given reason. It's just the amount of evidence that you have is really going to determine whether it's worth it and how much appetite you have for money. So generally, if you can solve things through other means, it's usually easier. Sometimes it's the last resort. And if crimes are committed, go to your local authorities. Like that is the people that can do that. But sorry for a weird answer there.
Yeah, I would add to that, like if you got your domain through GoDaddy or something, like try contacting them first. And you could probably give them some proof that you're the business owner and they'll help you.
Yeah, especially if it was like somebody used your laptop or things like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to end this here. Amanda, thank you so much for spending an hour with us. Like I said, look out for Sputnik's program. I think we sent out a mailer this morning, but there will be some more in the coming weeks. We love them. They've been partners with us for years and years, and they run a very, really cool program to really help founders go from that level. I think Joe, which I believe is your GP.
Yeah, he's a GP.
Yep. Loves to run around saying they teach nerds how to sell. So if you are the founder who can build software, is super passionate about an idea, and all those other layers of a business are intimidating or scary or just, unknown to you, really check out Sputnik's programs. I think they took a small cohort of 6 or 7, so it's a really intimate cohort, I imagine.
Yeah, we it's kind of like the benefit of a small classroom. You get more attention from the teachers who are the GPs. They teach the class and they run the program. We invest 100K, follow option to follow on up to 400K. And we have companies that apply all over the world from Gust.
Yeah. Is it a fixed ownership percentage? Does it kind of depend on the company stage?
It's a safe note. It's the same safe note for everybody.
Cool.
So it's 100K with a $3 million cap and a 30% discount.
Very fair. Excellent. Well, thank you again, Amanda. Look out for more stuff from Sputnik and Gust, and have a great rest of your week, everybody.
Great. Thank you.
See you.